So thank you very much everyone for being here, and I'll pass it back to our incredible Indigenous leaders.
Okay, so I'm going to start this next half, and Rachel Maza again. I don't know if there's anyone new in the room. Anyway, my provocation. I was thinking, do I need to introduce myself more than that? Okay, that'll do. My provocation was, why is it important? So that's a loaded question, obviously, because I'm assuming it is. Why is it important that we as First Nations people, Aboriginal people, have creative control, have authority over our stories? There's a couple of distinctions that I wanted to make before I got to that, directly to that question. And there was a quote, actually, that I remember hearing someone saying, and I Googled it and I found it, a lady called Grace Lee Boggs, an American, in the 40s, feminist intellectual. History is not in the past. It is the stories we tell about the past. How we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. So the notion that, anyway, what I love about that is how our entire identity, how we perceive ourselves in the world, the human being, is defined by the stories we tell now about our history. So history is a living now thing that we are creating through our storytelling. So we, as artists, as everybody, are constantly defining and redefining who we are on a moment-by-moment basis every time we affirm or conflict our ideas of what our history is. Anyway, I love that idea. So the other distinction I wanted to make too is just, and these are all kind of reminders to myself as I make art. This one is particularly around that we all are not clean slates. We don't come into the theatre or a performance or watching a film with nothing. There is no such thing as an audience coming in with nothing. We all come in with a lot of baggage, a lot of ideas, a lot of what you already knows. And these ideas are fed to us as we grow up in the world, in our society, informs how we think and what we believe and what we think the truths are. So there are no truths. They are subjective truths that are informed by our society. And often we're not aware that we're doing it. So they live in our subconscious. So they're what I call, well, no, I don't call it, it's I don't know if this is a generic term, but anyway, it's the collective subconscious. So the ideas that we all agree on, the collective agreement, those things that we believe to be true because we all agree. And that's the only reason they're true. The other distinction I wanted to make was that history, the famous adage that we all know, history is written by the victors, the winners. So there's already the history that we're fed into our belief systems of who we are, that informs who we are right here and now, is written often by a bias that leans towards the dominant culture. It is often informed by and driven by and perpetuated by the dominant culture. So being aware as artists that, or as human beings again, that the way we think is informed by the dominant paradigm. my little side to myself, and our role as artists is to perpetuate these or challenge them. Now now we're getting closer to my provocation, is why is it important that we have authority and creative control over our stories as those that don't belong to that dominant paradigm? Is there are, in that collective subconscious world of sort of truths, is these ideas that will continue to be perpetuated. And having an academic background, I was introduced to the term only recently about tropes, which I think, anyway, as I understand it, is the ideas that continue to be perpetuated in our storytelling as a society. And in particular, I'll narrow this conversation down to the stories that we will continue to perpetuate about Indigenous people or about First Nations people, Aboriginal people, these tropes. And often it comes out of this subconscious collective thinking. And while we, as Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations peoples, while we continue to not be in control of our stories, there are certain tropes that will continue to be perpetuated. And I just picked up that book the other day, so I'm only a few pages in, but what did I just say the name of the title was? The Inconvenient Indian. Is that it? Is that right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm loving that the conversation's being had again and again and again. Like, it's definitely a being had conversation right here in the now, certainly in these, like that, certainly when I pick up that book, I go, oh yeah, like, I agree. But he talks about the tropes in terms of you look at the history of all the films that have been made and the stories that have been perpetuated, but you'll see the similar themes that come up, but there's how First Nations Aboriginal people are represented, and that is they fall into those three categories of the savage, like the vicious, scary savage, and the noble savage, dignified, noble, on a horse, all that sort of stuff, and the dying savage. So kind of the Darwin theory kind of kicking in, that somehow these people are a part of a time gone by and kind of fated, it had to happen, part of evolution idea. And we have exactly the same theories in Australia as well. They're very familiar. You can almost pull out any film and see them, falling. They might be a combination of those themes, but it's there. And then I thought, as I was thinking this morning, and then actually, what are the tropes that appear for the other side? Like, so you've got your classic cowboy and Indian movie, so there's the kind of the representation of First Nations people, how they appear. But then there's also the tropes that exist for the dominant paradigm. So the cowboy. So you get the hero, who is the conqueror, and who discovers great lands and overcomes great adversity. So the hero, adventurer. Well, I'm just using stupid words now. Anyway, and then you get the saviour, the friend of the Indian. I heard the other day. The do-gooder, often you'll get those films where it's one white person in a sea of black people and they all need help. And that white person's going to save them somehow. And then there's the reluctant hero, the everyman. So the person who represents every one of us, the person in the audience is identifying with that every man in the film who by accident ends up saving everyone. Anyway, they were all variations of heroes. And the other tropes about Indigenous people are not heroes. They're about definitely they're in the other basket, but the idea of the savage, and it was another anyway. What's interesting about the language, even the use of the word savage, that goes right back to really the early kind of writings about, unless this is someone who hasn't done much reading, but anyway, going back to the Greek writing, Aristotle and Plato and all that stuff, like the use of and the invention of this idea. Another brilliant book, actually, halfway through reading, is the Savage Anxieties, The Invention of Western Civilization by Robert Williams Jr. And he's a Native American lawyer / academic. I think you can actually watch his lecture. He does the kind of talks his book on YouTube in several parts. But he traces back the kind of invention of this particular trope of the savage, but talks about it as the antithesis to civilization. So this incredible idea that civilization as a concept only exists because it has an opposite. So it actually needs its opposite to exist. Anyway, another fantastic concept. So anyway, this all leads me to my provocation, which is why I've kind of answered the question already, why it's so important, therefore, that we as Indigenous people have authority over our stories. It's to counter those tropes and to kind of wipe that space and what stories start to emerge are surprising and unfamiliar, and that's a good thing. And what you will also start to see, and I don't know why I'm saying start, because this has been a long game, you know, like there was decades now of this journey, but as we are moving towards this critical mass, these what we're going to see more and more through our storytelling is the heroes. I think is going to be one of the strong themes that comes out. It seems to me that that all peoples, going back to this idea that our history is created right here and now in our present through our how we talk about ourselves and identify ourselves in our storytelling. But we all talk about our heroes. We as any human being will talk about their greats or their, the people who first did this, or blah blah blah. It's all about your heroes. You build yourself. Your identity is founded on your this mountain of heroes behind you. Whether it's the women or it's whatever form it takes. And that's what we will be seeing more and more of, and that's what we will, as we have. And I suppose why even have to make this crazy distinction about? Why even have to ask this stupid question? Why should we have authority? It's such a given, isn't it? Like, it's so crazy that we even have to say it, and it is an issue. It's a huge issue in Australia. We've got such a long history, and I'm assuming it's probably something similar from what I've gauged in the last couple of years. I've been coming back and forth here. There's a very similar history between our two countries, but certainly a lot of the stories that exist in the canon in Australia have not been authored by Aboriginal, First Nations, Indigenous people, and it's problematic. And you'll hear the classic whinge from an actor, Indigenous actor, about this mountain of shitty roles they've had to play, and often you're at the end of this long creative food chain, and yet you're expected to somehow fix it on the day, 5 minutes from shooting. You're never paid for those roles. So the unpaid, reluctant consultant, And there's only, and we all know there's only so much you can do in those roles. Anyway, and therefore it's really important to have to articulate and to kind of fight for that ground, that it's critical that we, and I'm not saying that we won't collaborate, because of course we will. I really get that the way forward is together. But the Indigenous people have to be in the driving seat, I believe. And how and what that shape that takes is for everybody to kind of, that is to be defined. But I would certainly, I can be really literal and hard line about it, and it's like, okay, the writer, director, producer has to be black or First Nations. Getting back to the idea of collaboration, though, I really understand that there's something that's going to ultimately be the way forward. If we as a people on this planet are going to move forward, we're going to have to do it together in a way that is respectful and with real listening, deep listening, and a kind of healthy curiosity, and a humanity, compassion, all those kind of big words. Because also there's a lot of privilege within our friends. Have had a very privileged, often education and training and even an inbuilt confidence or whatever it is that we're very happy to share and learn from. So, I'm all for collaboration as well. But it's very, very critical, it feels to me, that as we move forward, that we are in control, we're in the driving seat. So, kind of just going to have my own conversation here. Answered my own provocation, didn't I? It's a bit loaded. So I'm going to open it up to you guys.
Well, I think before the break, leading to that thought was because of the many experiences we've had where we've not been in those positions of power. So we're not invited to be the assistant director, even. And I feel that we need to be, that's what I'm trying to do, is we need to be able to bring our people along and encourage the ones to take on these roles. Like, I can't do everything. I'd love to be a director. I can't get there yet, but there are other young directors and people coming along. We need to put them forward. We need to, non-native companies, if they're working or wanting to create an opportunity for Aboriginal perspective in their work, in the adaptation of a play, in the development of new work, in the producing of an Indigenous work. I feel because of their privilege and of 50, 60 years of public funding from the Canada Council for the Arts, that was there. It was all about nation building in the early years. They built the theaters. They got money for all the artistic teams to develop through the years. Really, so those people and that kind of echelon has this privilege that they need to not just step aside. They need to work together. We need to work together, offer opportunities so that an Aboriginal young director can be part of the process, really step aside, really put some resources towards our community to develop their designers and develop playwrights and develop actors and give those opportunities. Like, we need to open this up.
I also get that it actually is it's challenging to the way it has been done. So we're all well aware of budget constraints, and timelines, tight timelines. So kind of all of that needs to be rethunk. because things take longer if you do them properly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like what it takes to following your protocols and consulting with your community properly
Oh, my goodness.
takes time.
I mean, you can have a
Years.
phone call, you can have a phone meeting with somebody, but really, I don't know, some of the people I've worked with, it takes, even I've worked with them for years, it still takes the conversation, the meeting face-to-face, then maybe another conversation, then maybe another meeting then the bringing in of the other people. Like, it's developing a relationship. It takes a long time, and it's so vital. It's so vital that we accept that that is part of the process. And yes, we are dancing to the tune of the way it has been done and all of that, but we really need to find ways to do it differently.
And the process is everything. I have to say, making work is you know, like obviously we're at this end now with Jack Charles versus the Crown, we're touring, we're taking the work out, that's all fantastic. But the process is my favourite bit, is actually the kind of, the whole making and talking and collaborating, and you know, that's not to be underestimated.
Yeah.
I think we can give ourselves that as well.
And
And also that to do things properly is where the gold's going to come out. Like, we're all going to surprise ourselves in a good way with what we're going to be seeing once we start kind of breaking down the walls of how you do it. Sorry, I cut
No, it's fine. I think it brings us back to exactly what we were kind of talking about right before the break was, yes, these processes, they take longer. And Margo, I think you said the difference between speaking to us who are the artists and speaking to our communities and asking what they need is very important, right? And I'm really grateful for all the new spaces being opened up for us right now, you know, with the NAC bringing down Indigenous theatre, and I know some universities are working very actively to include Aboriginal content and Aboriginal instructors and all sorts of things like this. But those are only a very small portion of our communities, and it's not necessarily serving those communities. It's in some way still serving the institution. It's the institution showing that we want to be engaged instead of engaging. And that for me, it's yes, and again, I'm so grateful for the new opportunities, but it's not really honoring these protocols in our communities, which is what a lot of us in the middle are trying to do. We're trying to honor the community and get the money and honor the community, and we're stuck in this place of not being able to do both sometimes.
And though, and I agree, absolutely,
Yeah.
100% agree with that. I can totally relate to that position you're in. There's a kind of another conversation that's been kind of there, that's, anyway, just kind of an added provocation, is the theatre that we make for our community different from the theatre that we make for the rest of the country. Is it?
I would say
Yes.
often, yeah.
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 For the most part, I don't think those audiences have learned how to meet yet. As an audience, I don't think it's, and I think it's this collaboration and this learning and this back and forth that you were just talking about moments ago. That's a very long process, but I don't think they've figured out how to occupy the same theaters and the same community centers.
And I also think it's about self in making as well. So it's important also to turn to look at the makers who are involved as well, instead of, you know, mainstream reception or sending out for audiences, because again, I think as the maker, you're able to connect with knowledges and spirituality, ways of being, and initiative and memories and your personal relationships. So you probably are always engaging with immediate community. And I think that reception from larger audiences is not always going to be the same.
I mean, there's a part of me that's, as an artist, is definitely has this kind of idealistic idea. I mean, certainly I think of that like with the show like Jack Charles versus the Crown, that once again, the Western art form is a tool, and we master that tool to make great art. But has authenticity. I mean, has integrity. If you kind of get those two things right, then you make great work that speaks to everyone universally, because it's specific as well. Specificity is critical.
I think too, you know, like for instance, when I could tour my solo show with just a technician in my suitcase, we could go many places that you can't go when you have a big production. And so the experience to be in a place that is not a theater, where none of our people went anyway, so that you would, you know, it was very trying for years to feel like, you know, to feel the challenge of doing your work and opening yourself up to a whole audience full of people who didn't really get you or get your community and didn't respect your community anyway. So that's like a big deal in the first place as one person on stage. But what was really interesting as being able to take that piece to smaller communities was you could actually engage with the people who really got the work, who laughed at all your jokes. Even if it wasn't a joke, they laughed, they got it, they were responsive, they were, you know, and many actors, many Aboriginal artists have said the same thing. It's just a joy to perform for your own people because they get it, they enjoy it, they laugh at the terrible scenes as well as the funny scenes. You know, they're there viscerally and physically and loudly. They're talking to you, they're responding to what you're doing. And that's such an incredible experience. And much different than working with working for a non-native audience, performing for a non-native audience. I don't say that I think I learned a lot by performing for for a long time. Not many people at all that were Indigenous in my audiences. So I learned to be courageous and give it all anyway. I give it all anyway. One night I was very I was doing the show at a certain point. I do the whole powwow, so I dance everything powwow. I do the little kids dance, the little boys, the little girls. I do the women's, I do the men's, and I do all this whole thing to the 3-minute powwow. And at the end of it, one audience it was silent. And that day I was being particularly peevish, and I thought, they didn't clap, they didn't respond, and I'm catching my breath and I'm walking around the stage, and I'm walking around the stage again in silence, and I'm walking around the stage one more time. So it was like 3 or 4 times I'm walking around the stage, just waiting for them, not just waiting for them, but just thinking, well, okay, I'm going to wait then till I start again. They can wait on me then. So I'm being a little, peevish. And I look up to the balcony, and there was nobody in the balcony, but it was a space, there was a sort of an old balcony. And I looked up and I felt like my ancestors were all of a sudden there. And I looked at the audience and I realized they were listening to me. They were there, they were waiting, they were hanging, they were there. And I thought, this is so important that you just accept that some people will hear and some people will respond and will hear in their own way. And it doesn't matter. You have the stage. You have the stage. Like, what more do you want? But has been, I think, challenging for us to have our people come into those performance spaces that we would like to perform in. That, yes, I would like to perform in some of those big spaces, and I will perform in the little community stage where, I have to push the cassette player myself because there's no sound system or no lights. I have to push it myself, and then all the powwow starts, and all the little kids come running up to the stage and climb on and start dancing with me. Like I said, whoa, it's a whole different experience. It's fabulous. Yes, I would like a big stage, but I don't want to deny myself the opportunity to be in the place where the part of the audience is sitting on the floor, and when I start to sing my drum song sitting on the floor, the baby crawls out of her arms and into my lap. I want that kind of be able to permeate that sort of wall that somehow we're separate from the people, and I want to be able to be in places where that can still happen. I also want to be in a theater where our people will feel welcome to come into a theater space I think it was maybe the 209 Talking Stick. We went over to the K-Meek's big 500-seat beautiful theater in West Van, and Squamish Nation bussed over their people, and it was filled with Aboriginal people who'd never been in that theater, beautiful theater. So you want to have the possibility for that.
And I guess that's kind of what I was saying is there are works that transcend those audiences, but I don't think those audiences are meeting currently. And that's kind of an interesting thing for me. And I think that story is a great opportunity to kind of bridge a little further towards the provocation I brought, which was how does creating new work, what is it exactly? You guys have it probably. How does creating new works connect you to your roots? And so this is, I think there's two conversations we're having right now that are useful here. God, my face is large. And one is this idea of two audiences and how we have this very cultural experience in this one setting in this community center, and then a very Western experience in the large proscenium, and what that conversation internally means for a lot of us that have grown up in urban settings or in sort of in-between areas where we identify as both Western and Indigenous and have that constant struggle within ourselves. And then something else, thank you for bringing up tropes, because I've been working a lot with a question right now about what are the tropes that we embody that we have to deconstruct and identify that we're living and we're presenting ourselves as, and how do we create new tropes for ourselves? So how does creating new work connect you to your roots?
What about, can you describe the work a little bit that you're working on?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I stated earlier that I don't hold stories or songs or things like this, but I have a cultural experience that I can latch onto. It's tangible for me. And so the piece I'm working on right now and have been for about a year and a half has to do with my own return to culture in some way, my return to land, and that's a conversation that even arriving at that conversation took me until I was 25, because that's the reality we live in. That's part of our struggle is I wasn't even willing to have that conversation with myself. And so in this idea of rewriting the ideas that tradition and contemporary are different, and we can create contemporary works with traditional knowledge and practice, and also combating this idea of universal experience. I lived on a res, but I don't hold these stories, so I have these parts of this culture, but the public knowledge that I come up against often is that I should know these things or I should not. And I land always somewhere in between, and I think a lot of people in this circle probably, and in this room maybe even, land in that gray area a lot. And so my story of ignorance and battle within myself is a story I don't see on the stage very often. And so it's not a traditional story, and I'm not presenting myself as a traditional person. And so what are the tropes that I might be embodying in that work that I need to deconstruct to do that work? Is that useful?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Mm-hmm. It was often, when I was, because I wasn't raised with traditional story tellers, and so I had to go and look for my people. I had to look for, because even in my family, my mother was very busy, my birth mother was very busy just assimilating, just to survive. So that when I met some of my brothers and sisters, my sister said to me, my blood sister said to me, asked me where I learned all these Indian things from. And I looked at my mother, my birth mother, and I realized that's happened in my mother's generation. Seriously, it's maybe a little bit less now, but in our in the generations. But no, there's still a lot of separation from those cultural traditional knowledge keepers, and some have passed away. So we're still struggling with the fact that who is carrying and holding that traditional knowledge, and how do we avail ourselves of that? And are we responsible to bring, to find that, what's our role in that, right? And if we are going to be the people that, that are making claims and creating work and whatever else, then, what do we bring with us? What is still within us? What are we still searching? What parts of the story are still missing that we need to find? Will we find them? There's always this sense of loss that we will never retain. Some things we'll never find again. But there is also still that desire, I think, for us to try and connect to that, so that we have some integrity around the carrying on the knowledge and sharing that with the young ones coming along. It's definitely, I don't think you would find one person who, in our communities, who didn't maybe feel some sense of loss, if not responsibility, to reclaim that territory.
And that makes me think of what you were saying before about survival again, and making to survive. And I think that art has that very special gift of allowing us to, again, fuel the purpose or fuel the need to go back and to look back and to continue the search, again, through embodied practice, but for sharing as well. So reconnecting to roots is about survival, revisiting, rebuilding, and communicating those experiences with the immediate community, with your crew that you're making with, and to share and help and hold each other up in that way. So sharing the knowledge or the practices that you are able to find and to gain. And I think that theater has allowed us to be able to do that. And whether it's making the effort to seek out a knowledge holder to find a song or a dance, or just to be with them, and try and translate that into work. That's, to me, a dramaturgical structure and a practice and a reason. You reconnecting with stories or land for your work, that is a visualize, actualize, or a concrete example of dramaturgical practice that is inherently different from other ways of making, because it comes from traditional knowledge, worldview, and ways of being in relation to self and others and knowledge.
The word that keeps coming up is authority. And tied into this this conversation that we're talking about, what you don't know. How do you pass on something you don't know? How do you know who you are if you don't have all that knowledge? But I really feel that it is that the active nature of us to create or to express or to share that, to put this experience into something outside of ourselves that includes us, is performative in nature. That creative, active manifestation of our search, of our desire, of our unknowing, of our questioning, all of that. I think when we do that consistently, we're always going to not know. I mean, I think probably as I'm older, I realize the wisdom of that. I mean, that it's okay, that I'm more comfortable now not knowing than I used to be. I used to think I had to know everything and was desperate and feeling like an imposter because I didn't know things. But I think as I get older, I'm more comfortable in the not knowing, because it's an incredible freedom to be able to see what comes and see what emerges and see what happens. And that includes the teachers find, what do they say, this when the student is ready, the teacher appears? I've seen this happen over and over and over again in so many different ways. It doesn't happen like immediately, but I was putting together one of my first works. I was on a TV series set in northern Ontario. We were at a fishing camp. We were in little log cabins. And one of the elders, Anishinaabe elders, was on the show, and she was in another cabin, and I was in my cabin working on my script and my ideas, and I had my music, and I had my flip charts up, and I had all kinds of things on my place. And I would go visit for a while, and then I would leave. I'm working on something. And we would just be waiting in this fishing camp for our call to set, and they'd drive us half an hour up the road. And so we were there a week, and she said, finally, what are you working on? And I told her, and she said, well, and I said, I'm struggling with this at the center of the story, this and that. So one day she said, I have something that I would like to offer you. I have this story. And she told me the story. It was a story of her life. And she wanted to share it with me, and maybe I could use it. And that's the story that it sort of filled in a part for me, for the creation of something. So I feel that at certain points, different kinds of things like that have happened because you're actively engaged in trying to bring all of this together, and that the story or the song, or maybe you will never have your language, and maybe you will never have the rights to sing that song or anything else or tell that story, but there are things that will come in because we want it to, because we desire it, because our community needs it, because the ancestors say this needs to come forward, and they will find every possible way to bring that forward for us, because we are working in service for not just ourselves, but also for the edification or the inspiration for the movement of our own communities, to have the right to tell our story and to be honored in the sharing of that.
And I think it's interesting because we're talking about community and rebuilding and rebuilding in the absence of some of the information or knowledge. And I wonder how we can rethink the way we look at our societal structure based on this knowledge that we may be part of the new wave or new way of seeing knowledge holders, if that makes sense, because there is this clear gap in some of our communities, and we are telling stories that are relevant to our people in the world around us. And I think part of what I get from what you're getting at with that, Margo, is that we're working in some way to figure out how that all fits. And that's a big project. There's no easy answer, but I think that's really interesting to look at the societal implications of us doing our work.
I mean, I definitely feel, anyway, there's definitely two sorts of artists, aren't there? There's those art for art's sake artists, and then art that needs to be made, which I think's the interesting art. An art that just comes out of this, I need to talk about this that I'm experiencing, as opposed to people who should just go to psychotherapy. I'm not talking about that kind of art. There might be a little bit of that in there. No, but I think that's so absolutely valid, though, that the story, you know, that for instance that you're talking about your self-writing speaks for so many. I think that's what I was talking about. Your story is specifically your story, but it instantly becomes universal because it held so much integrity to your bringing an absolute integrity to that story that you will tell, that will instantly anyone else who is coming, you know, shares that experience instantly is going to be able to kind of engage. So there's an absolute that is our function, I think, as artists, absolutely. And then the other point, the thing that came up was, and also just that you know, what's your provocation about? You know, how does new work connect us to? How did you say
how does creating new works connect us to our roots?
To our roots, yeah. You know, and I'm very aware too of the healing nature of art. Like there is something that happens within ourselves, within the process, within the engagement that happens in the protocol process, we're working with community, and then for the moment that it's shared with our audiences, and the way audiences engage with that story, and if it's doing its job well, that they are in some way profoundly changed and begin another journey. So there's this, it's all about kind of forward moving, healing. I mean, just to be specific now, talking about the journey, witnessing and sharing for myself as well, but also specifically with Uncle Jack in his story, like the unbelievable, profound journey that he's gone on since we started making that production 6 years ago. And the role that art, this really fascinating, interesting role of that art has started to shift how he sees himself. And he kind of has articulated it sometimes and in certain ways, but without a doubt, the major turning point for him was watching the documentary when it first premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival. And I can only imagine that when he had the mirror held up to himself and actually saw himself so candidly, because he's so goddamn honest in the documentary, and I feel like something clicked for him. So anyway, just that whole notion that, and then the journey he's now gone on with the making of the play. I mean, and quite literally, as we were making the play, he had begun the process, which we supported. We took him down to one of our cultural organisations in Melbourne. Is called the Koori Heritage Trust, and they have a family link up section within their organisation. So basically, connected him with that person, and he began this process because being a stolen generation person, he actually didn't know his roots, and he's literally finding out. And hence, for those of you who come and see the play, there's references and photos that are used throughout the play, and there's a classic old photo of his great-great-great-grandfather. All of this was discovered in the making of the play. So it's only in the making of the play, like just in terms of your provocation, quite literally discovered who he was in terms of where he comes from and where his connection is. And in that knowledge has come this incredible growth. I mean, like his power is incredible to watch, the incredible growth and healing that's happened in the journey through the knowledge of knowing who he is and where he comes from. Has been very, very profound.
For me, when I was trying to reconnect, and knowing and meeting my birth family and knowing that they were desperately just trying to assimilate, and there was that my grandmother had died, and my mother was sorrowful that she couldn't pass on any of the medicine knowledge she carried because she didn't bother, she didn't learn it. That kind of sorrow that I know that lives across our nations, So my own need to try and connect to what were the performative theatrical events and things that happened in our tribal societies. What would have been in my society? To try and get in touch with some of that just seemed like, just such a, was like a desert. It was like, well, where is this knowledge? Where has all of this gone? And how can if I can connect to some of that, I can possibly find the resonance of what would I have been in a tribal society? In my tribal society, I would have been the storyteller, for instance. I might have been the singer. I doubt that I would have been the medicine person. I probably would have run in the opposite direction. They have to suffer a lot, apparently. But just that that in our societies there was the place for that storyteller, those people that sung the songs, that had to did their vision quest and had like a what was his name, the Sioux fellow who Black Elk, you know, who had to who then he had all these visions, and then part of what he had to do was he had to actually create he had to manifest his dream. So he had the whole community engaged in manifesting that dream in order for it to be passed, some knowledge to be passed on, and whatever that experience was united that community in a certain way. So there are a number of ceremonies and things that have come from those individuals that was their role in that society, to carry that, to express that, and probably many of them didn't have any answers, didn't know either.
Yeah, there's a lot of creating in that.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. I wanted to maybe put one thing out to the audience. There's a couple of people I think could weigh in on this. The idea has come up of both healers and artists. And so maybe if a couple of people in the room, not too many responses, maybe 2 or 3, healers, artists, or both in our communities. If anyone has any thoughts about that. You guys can be included as well. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think if you look traditionally in terms of our, across Turtle Island, what are the similarities in our performative practices? And I think that, you know, you look at entertainment and efficacy as being, you know, the 2 primal points. And efficacy being what was the purpose? What did it do? What does it do for the community? And there's great emphasis put on that. So I think artists and healers are the same thing, traditionally. And I think that we also see that in the contemporary world with the position that our people are taking as artists. And like Margo says, you know, it's about survival. And we're not being dramatic about that. It is quite literally about our survival. You know, and I think about myself and my own experiences and being a Skwxwu and having, you know, our artistic leaders. That was really, that made the difference for me in my own growth and gave me the strength. And that is rooted, you know, we talk about 7 generations back. That's part of our people. That's who we are. We are the healers and artists. It's the same line in what we do and why we do what we do.
I think it's also teachers.
I think that's kind of a nice place to end. I don't know if maybe Cole has something to add.
Well, I just wanted to add
Of course,
that
yeah.
artists as healers, but also as shit stirrers, provocateurs.
Yeah.
Mirrors.
But I
yeah,
think
all of
that's
that.
healing in and of
Yeah,
itself, right?
that form,
That's
yeah, exactly.
we have to get to the thing before we can
Exactly.
work out how to heal.
Yeah.
Chimikwecha, everyone. We have the room beyond 1:30, and thank you for your generosity of listening. We welcome you to kick around and continue the conversation, or pull on some threads that maybe this has inspired, and there's food. So,
yeah, there should still be some sweet stuff and coffee. You're very welcome to hang out in the lounge or even in the kitchen area if you want to stay for some more conversation. You're very, very welcome.
So we'll make the audio available very soon, and this conversation will be heading